I didn't know the exact moment my life split into before and after, but I know the sound that marked it. Laughter. Not the warm kind. Not the kind that belongs in hallways or lunch breaks. This was sharp, self-satisfied, polished by years of getting away with things. It echoed against glass walls and designer shelves, settling into my spine like a thin blade. Richard Coleman leaned back in his chair, hands folded comfortably over his stomach, the corners of his mouth lifting as if he'd just delivered a brilliant punchline. "You're jumping higher than your head," he said, eyes lingering a second too long. "But if you start jumping on me, your career will really take off." For a heartbeat, the room went silent. Not because anyone else heard him, we were alone, but because something inside me stopped making noise altogether. No rush of anger, no shock, just a sudden dangerous calm. He laughed. I didn't. People always imagine moments like that as explosive. Voices raised, doors slammed, tears maybe. But real damage rarely announces itself. It slips in gently, disguised as a joke, wearing the mask of power. Richard had mastered that mask. For months, I had learned how to breathe through his sarcasm. The way he called me ambitious, like it was a flaw. The way his compliments arrived coated in condescension. The side glances during meetings when I spoke too confidently. The pauses, deliberate, humiliating pauses, before he repeated my ideas in his own words and claimed them as his own. I told myself it was the price of being competent in a room ruled by men like him. I told myself I could handle it. That's the lie we're taught early on. Endurance equals strength. I sat across from him, hands resting neatly in my lap, recording every detail without seeming to. The faint buzz of his phone on the table, the smell of his cologne, sharp and invasive, the way he assumed silence meant submission. He waited for my reaction, a flush of embarrassment, a nervous laugh, maybe even gratitude disguised as flattery. I gave him nothing. Instead, I studied him, really studied him, the way you examine a crack in a wall you hadn't noticed before. His confidence wasn't natural. It was borrowed, built on job titles, company emails, people too afraid or too tired to push back. This wasn't the first time he'd said something like this. It was simply the first time he'd crossed the line openly enough that even he couldn't pretend it was accidental. I realized then that anger would have been easy. Easy things burn out fast. What settled in its place was far more durable. Memory. I remembered the intern who'd quit without explanation after one too many late meetings with Richard, the colleague who warned me jokingly not to be alone with him after 6. The stories that never reached paper because no one wanted to be that woman. Richard adjusted his tie, completely at ease. He had said worse before. He had survived worse before. He thought this meeting would end like all the others, with me nodding, thanking him for his guidance, leaving quietly. The dangerous thing about confidence built on power is that it blinds you to patience. I stood smoothing my skirt and met his gaze. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in his eyes. Not fear, not yet. Curiosity. You should think about what I said, he added lightly, as if offering career advice rather than issuing a warning wrapped in suggestion. I nodded, not in agreement, in acknowledgement. As I walked out of his office, every step felt steady, measured. I wasn't shaking, I wasn't crying, I wasn't planning revenge, not yet. But something essential had shifted. A line had been crossed, and once you see it clearly, you can never pretend it was invisible. People like Richard rely on confusion, on self-doubt, on the space between. Was that really what he meant? And maybe I'm overreacting. I no longer had questions. The laughter echoed in my mind again, smaller now, weaker. And for the first time since I started working under him, I thought a single, quiet thought. This is going to cost you far more than you think. Power has a smell. I noticed it more clearly after that meeting. Sharp, expensive, confident in its own permanence. It lingered around Richard the way cologne did, except this scent didn't fade when the door closed. It followed him through corridors, meetings, emails signed with his title beneath his name, Director. Richard Coleman loved that word. He loved the way people straightened when he entered a room, the way conversations softened around him, careful not to offend, the way junior employees laughed too loudly at his jokes and senior ones pretended not to hear them at all. Power insulated him, it excused him, it fed him, and it made women like me irritate him, not openly, never that. His irritation showed in small, controlled ways, the kind that could be dismissed if challenged. When I presented data he hadn't asked for, he'd raise an eyebrow and say, "Ambitious today, aren't we, Emily?" When my numbers contradicted his assumptions, he'd smile thinly and move on, only to circle back later with a comment about overconfidence. He didn't dislike incompetence. He disliked independence. I saw it clearly once I allowed myself to name it. Richard needed to feel necessary, superior, desired even. Women in the office fell into neat categories in his mind: useful, decorative, or disappointing. I occupied the last one. I didn't flirt. I didn't shrink. I didn't play along. To him, that was arrogance. To him, I should have been grateful. Grateful for his attention, his guidance, his willingness to joke. Grateful he hadn't ignored me completely. That entitlement pulsed beneath every interaction, hidden just well enough that he could deny it if called out. Men like Richard never think they're the villain. In his mind, he was generous, forgiving, patient. If someone failed, it was because they didn't listen. If someone left, it was because they couldn't handle the pressure. If someone complained, it was because they misunderstood his intentions. That morning, I watched him in a department meeting from across the table. He leaned back, arms crossed, letting others speak before dismissing them with a sentence or two. When Jacob tried to challenge him, Richard smiled and said, "Let's not get emotional." That earned a few chuckles. Jacob went quiet. Control through humiliation, just subtle enough. When my turn came, I spoke carefully. Neutral tone, clear facts. I could feel Richard watching me, waiting for a stumble. When it didn't come, his fingers tapped against the table, a small, unconscious betrayal. He interrupted me halfway through. "Let's save the details," he said. "We don't need to complicate things." That was Richard's favorite weapon, reduction, making complex work seem unnecessary, making effort look like noise, making you feel foolish for caring. I nodded and stopped. Across the table, I saw it again, that flicker in his eyes. Satisfaction mixed with something else. Ownership. He believed he had corrected me, put me back where I belonged. To him, hierarchy wasn't just structure, it was morality. He was right because he was above. Anyone below him existed on borrowed ground. After the meeting, people filtered out quickly, relief visible in their shoulders. I stayed behind, pretending to reorganize my notes. Richard didn't say anything to me. That too was deliberate. Silence as reminder. As I passed his office, I heard him laughing with another director. Confident, relaxed, untouchable. That was when I understood something important. Richard wasn't powerful because he was exceptional. He was powerful because no one had forced him to examine himself. He didn't see risk. He saw entitlement. He imagined boundaries as suggestions, respect as something owed upward, and consequences as things that happen to other people. Weaker people, careless people, people without his connections. I thought of his comment again, replaying it not with shame, but with curiosity. He hadn't whispered it. He hadn't hesitated. He had said it like a man who expected no resistance. That kind of certainty doesn't come from bravery. It comes from history. I went back to my desk and opened my inbox. The familiar grid of emails stared back at me, ordinary and harmless. Below the surface, though, patterns existed. Gaps. Names that used to appear and no longer did. Richard was drunk on power, and like all drunks, he overestimated his balance. What he didn't know, what men like him never notice, is that the people they underestimate are often standing still, not frozen, but steady. And sobriety always comes eventually. I closed my inbox, took a breath, and let the calm settle deeper. This wasn't about revenge. This was about clarity. Richard had shown me exactly who he was. Now it was my turn to decide who I would be. There is a particular kind of moment when time slows, not because something extraordinary is happening, but because something inevitable has finally arrived. For me, it came 2 days after his comment. Richard called me into his office late in the afternoon, just as the floor was beginning to empty. That detail wasn't accidental. He liked privacy when he believed he was in control. The glass walls were still there, but at that hour they felt decorative rather than protective. I stepped inside with a notebook under my arm, my expression neutral, my pulse steady. He didn't invite me to sit. Instead, he leaned against his desk, arms crossed, posture casual in a way meant to suggest superiority. The silence stretched. He expected me to fill it. "Emily," he finally said, drawing out my name as if tasting it. "I've noticed a change in your attitude lately." I raised an eyebrow slightly, not defensively, curiously. "A change?" I asked. "You seem distant," he said. "Less flexible. I don't want misunderstandings between us." Between us. He liked phrasing things as shared problems. It softened the accusation while keeping the power firmly on his side. I nodded slowly, as if considering his words. In truth, I was listening not to what he said, but to how comfortable he was saying it. That carelessness was important. "I'm focused on my work," I replied. "That hasn't changed." He smiled, thin and knowing. "Work is never just work here. You know that." There it was, the implication, the unspoken rule book he believed everyone followed. I met his eyes and didn't look away. "You're right," I said calmly, "and that's actually what I wanted to talk about." That gave him pause. Not fear, not yet, but surprise. He hadn't expected me to claim the purpose of the conversation. He gestured toward the chair. "Go on." I sat, crossing my legs carefully, every movement deliberate. I wasn't here to explode. I wasn't here to plead. I was here to name something. "There are comments you make," I continued, my voice even, conversational. "Comments that blur professional boundaries. I want to be clear that I find them inappropriate." The word inappropriate landed softly. No accusations, no dramatics, just precision. His smile didn't disappear. It widened. "Oh, come on," he said lightly. "You can't seriously be referring to that joke." Joke. The universal shield. "I'm referring to a pattern," I replied, "and I'm setting a boundary." For the first time, silence worked against him. He straightened, the casual lean gone. "You're interpreting things very personally." "No," I said. "I'm interpreting them accurately." That did it. Something hardened in his expression, irritation edged with disbelief. People like Richard don't expect resistance delivered without emotion. Anger, yes. Tears, yes. Calm certainty confuses them. He walked around the desk slowly, stopping across from me. "You should be careful," he said quietly. "You're ambitious. That can work for or against you." There it was, the soft threat, polished, plausibly deniable. I looked up at him and felt something surprising. Not fear, but clarity. A stillness so complete it felt rehearsed, though it wasn't. "You've just explained a lot about yourself," I said. "Thank you." He blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I continued, standing now, "that I understand exactly how you view authority, professionalism, and women who don't play along. And that's useful." For a second, he looked unsure whether to laugh or lash out. He chose laughter. "You're overestimating your position," he said. "Don't confuse tolerance with weakness." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply nodded, not respectfully, but conclusively. As I reached the door, he spoke again, sharper this time. "Careful, Emily. People who cause trouble don't last long here." I turned back. People who mistake silence for consent often misunderstand what happens next, I said, still calm. Then I left. My hands didn't shake until I reached the stairwell. Even then, it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline releasing its hold. I pressed my palm against the cool metal railing and breathed. Richard thought he had won. In his version of events, he had warned me, put me in my place, reasserted control. He would replay the scene later and feel satisfied. What he didn't realize was that the power dynamic had already shifted. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused. I hadn't demanded justice or acknowledgement. I had done something far more dangerous. I had named him, quietly, clearly, and shown him that I was no longer confused. Men like Richard survive on ambiguity, on doubt, on people second-guessing themselves. I wasn't second-guessing anything anymore. And once certainty sets in, silence stops being passive. It becomes preparation. Silence changes meaning once you know how to use it. Before Richard, my silence had been survival, a way to move forward without friction, without being noticed too closely. After that meeting, it became something else entirely. Strategic, observant, sharp. I didn't confront him again. I didn't avoid him either. I became exactly what men like Richard find most unsettling, professionally invisible and internally alert. Every interaction became data. I arrived on time. I left on time. My emails were concise, factual, impossible to misread. No emotive language, no apologies tucked into sentences where they didn't belong. I continued to do my job well, better than ever actually, because clarity has a way of sharpening focus. And quietly, methodically, I began collecting. It started with memory, dates, exact phrasing, context. I wrote them down at home in a notebook I kept hidden beneath a stack of old manuals. Not dramatic entries, no emotional commentary, just facts. Meeting titles, who was present, what was said, how it was received. Then came the emails. Once you look for patterns, they reveal themselves without resistance. Messages sent late at night. Jokes that existed only in private conversations. Praise that veered too close to personal interest. Follow-ups that didn't quite align with professional necessity. None of it explosive on its own. Together, it told a story. I wasn't alone in it. That became clear soon enough. Casual conversations in the break room turned revealing when I learned how to listen differently. A pause before someone answered a question. An exchanged glance when Richard's name came up. a laugh that arrived a second too late. One afternoon, while waiting for the printer, I mentioned a comment Richard had made. Harmlessly, neutrally, as if unsure whether I'd misunderstood it. The woman beside me froze. Then she exhaled, just barely. "Yeah," she said after a moment. "That sounds like him." That was all. But it was enough. I never asked direct questions. I never pressed. People volunteer truth more easily when they don't feel interrogated. Over time, small confirmations stacked quietly on top of one another. I learned about the intern, about the resignation with no exit interview, about the colleague who transferred departments without explaining why. Patterns again? Richard mistook my calm for retreat. In meetings, he pushed harder, interrupting more frequently, testing whether my boundary had been real or just momentary defiance. I let him interrupt. I noted when, how often, in front of whom. Men like him forget something critical. Silence doesn't erase evidence. It preserves it. At night, I organized everything digitally. Folders nested inside folders, files labeled carefully. Nothing emotional, nothing exaggerated, just clean, undeniable chronology. Still no HR, not yet. Human resources thrives on ambiguity, on quiet settlements, on misunderstandings. I wasn't ready to offer them a puzzle. I was building a case. The strangest part was how calm I felt. There were flashes, of course. Moments when anger flared, sharp and hot, when I imagined how easily he moved through the world, unchallenged, confident that consequences were for other people. But rage is loud, and loud things draw attention too early. Patience, I was learning, is not passive. It is delayed force. One evening, as I packed up my things, Richard passed my desk and stopped. "You've been very quiet lately," he said. I looked up and smiled politely. "Busy week." He studied my face, searching for something. Uncertainty, perhaps. Submission. He found nothing. "Well," he said, straightening his jacket, "let's keep communication open." I watched him walk away, aware that his confidence was beginning to wobble, just slightly. Men like Richard sense shifts before they understand them. Instinct precedes logic. That night, I added the interaction to my notes. Date, time, exact phrasing. Silence before a storm is often mistaken for peace. But storms don't start loudly. They gather pressure slowly, invisibly. They wait until the conditions are exact. Richard had no idea how much weight was forming above him. He thought my silence meant compliance. What it really meant was preparation. Richard's favorite arena was the meeting room. That was where he performed best, under muted lights, surrounded by people who needed him to approve budgets, timelines, futures. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult outright. He preferred precision humiliation, a raised eyebrow, a cutting interruption, a dismissive laugh placed perfectly so it could still be called banter later. I had been one of his reliable targets, until I changed the rules. The shift was subtle, almost invisible. I stopped reacting. No tightening of my jaw when he interrupted. No defensive clarifications. No attempt to regain the floor if he talked over me. I simply waited, then continued exactly where I'd left off, as if he hadn't spoken at all. The first time it happened, he blinked. As I was saying, I continued smoothly, clicking to the next slide. Numbers, clean graphs, no qualifiers. He tried again minutes later. "And how confident are we in those projections, really?" he asked, his tone light, inviting doubt from the room. "Very," I replied. "They're based on last quarter's verified data. It's in the appendix." And I stopped talking. Silence stretched. People glanced at the screen, then at him. I had given him no opening, no emotional hook, no insecurity to exploit. Just facts, delivered and released. Richard nodded slowly, lips pressed together. "Fine," he said. "Next." I could feel it then, like a hairline crack spreading under pressure. Men like Richard don't need admiration as much as they need reaction. Resistance feeds them. Anger excites them. Even discomfort reassures them of relevance. But indifference? Indifference unnerves them. I became relentlessly professional. Short sentences, neutral tone, no extra words. In emails, I responded only to what was necessary. No emojis, no softened phrasing, nothing that could be twisted into anything but competence. Others noticed. In the kitchen one morning, Jacob raised his coffee cup toward me slightly. "Bold presentation yesterday," he said quietly. "Just accurate," I replied. That was the point. Accuracy became my shield. Richard, meanwhile, started unraveling in small ways. He interrupted more frequently, but less effectively. His jokes fell flat when no one rushed to laugh. He corrected details that weren't wrong. He repeated himself. Once, during a meeting, he snapped at an analyst for mislabeling a chart he himself had approved the day before. The room went quiet. I said nothing. I just noted it. Afterward, he cornered me by the elevators. "You've been very formal lately," he said, forcing a half smile. "I've always been professional," I replied. "That's not what I meant." "I know," I said. That earned me a sharp look. For the first time since I'd known him, Richard seemed unsure where the edges were. He had tried to reassert dominance through familiarity, and I had closed the door politely but firmly. Inside, I felt nothing triumphant. No satisfaction yet. Just focus. At home, my digital archive grew. Meeting recordings, calendar invites sent late at night, witnesses present when he attempted to humiliate someone, instances when his behavior shifted depending on gender, rank, or privacy. Patterns again. Humiliation is a tool, but only as long as it lands. Once people stop shrinking, it rebounds. By the end of that week, Richard was no longer relaxed in meetings. He leaned forward, voice tighter, comments sharper. The controlled veneer was cracking. Power depends on belief. The belief that the powerful are untouchable, unquestionable. I wasn't challenging him directly. I was eroding that belief quietly in front of others. He started showing up at my desk more often. "Quick question," he'd say, leaning closer than necessary. I'd swivel my monitor toward him. "What do you need?" Caught off guard. Again. One afternoon, after another meeting where his attempt to undermine me failed, he lingered as people filed out. "You think you're very clever?" he said under his breath. I met his eyes. "I think I'm doing my job. That won't protect you forever." I smiled politely. "It's not meant to." And I walked away. That night, as I backed up my files, I realized something important. This phase wasn't about exposure yet. It was about positioning, about letting him make mistakes while believing he was maintaining control. I was playing his game now. Only I wasn't playing to win an argument. I was playing for the moment when the rules would matter far more than his confidence. Richard's biggest weakness wasn't cruelty. It was certainty. He believed he had recalibrated the balance between us, that my formality was a phase, that my distance was a tactic that would eventually exhaust itself. To men like him, resistance without escalation always looks temporary. That belief made him careless. It was late, later than usual, when my phone lit up on the nightstand. I hadn't given Richard my personal number. He'd taken it from the internal directory, where it sat tucked between emergency contacts and project leads, never meant to be used socially. The screen glowed in the dark. Richard Coleman. Still working? Long day. I didn't respond. Not immediately. Not at all. The message itself was harmless on its surface. That was the brilliance of it. Plausible curiosity, professional concern, something that could be shrugged off if questioned. But timing is a language of its own. He knew exactly what he was doing. 10 minutes passed, then another message. You've been pushing yourself lately. Ambition is admirable. Dangerous, too, if you don't have the right support. There it was. The implication wrapped in mentorship. The same tone he'd used in his office. The same boundary-testing phrasing. I set the phone face down. I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel anger. I felt something quieter and far more precise. Recognition. This wasn't escalation. This was exposure. The next message arrived a little after midnight. We should talk sometime. Off the record. I exhaled slowly. Richard had made a mistake. Not because the message was explicit, but because it wasn't. Men who believe they're untouchable never realize that subtlety creates just as strong a trail as overt misconduct, sometimes stronger. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and authenticated into the secure folder. Screenshots, metadata, carriers, timestamps. I captured everything and backed it up twice, once locally, once externally. Then I wrote it down. Date, time, exact wording, context. I marked the day in my mind with absolute clarity. The following morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. That too mattered. He greeted me politely in the hallway, commented on a presentation as if the late-night messages hadn't existed. He didn't mention them. He didn't apologize. He assumed my silence meant permission. Arrogance always demands confirmation. In a meeting later that day, he interrupted me again, sharper this time, irritation leaking through professionalism. That's not what we agreed on, he said. It's what's documented, I replied, turning the screen so the room could see. His jaw tightened. Two people glanced at each other. The moment passed, but something had shifted again. After the meeting, he lingered. You could have handled that differently, he said. I handled it accurately, I replied. He stepped closer, just slightly. You're being difficult lately. I looked at him evenly. I'm being correct. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded, as if making a decision. The confidence was back, not relaxed, but determined. He believed the messages hadn't landed. He believed he was still in control. That night, there were no texts. The night after that, there was one. Did I upset you? That wasn't my intention. Intention. Another shield. I saved it. Richard was trying to course correct without withdrawing. He sensed danger but didn't know where it was coming from. That kind of uncertainty makes men like him reckless. His confidence made him predictable. I didn't confront him. I didn't block him. I didn't warn him. I let him talk. And every word he sent tightened the net he didn't know he was stepping into. The mistake wasn't the message. The mistake was assuming my silence meant hesitation. In reality, it meant I was done wondering if this was real. Now I knew exactly when it had become undeniable. And once a line is time-stamped, there's no erasing it. There is a moment in every long game when gathering stops and direction begins. For me, that moment came on a Thursday morning, staring at my screen, cursor blinking patiently at the end of a sentence I had rewritten 4 times. The evidence was complete. The pattern was undeniable. Another week of observation wouldn't strengthen it. It would only delay what needed to happen. I still didn't go to HR. That wasn't hesitation. That was discernment. Human resources exist to protect the company, not the people inside it. I'd watched how complaints softened once they entered that department, how sharp edges were smoothed into neutral language. Perception issues, miscommunication, no malicious intent detected. Richard thrived in those gray zones, so I chose somewhere else. Reputation is currency in certain rooms, far more valuable than titles. Directors answer to boards. Boards answer to investors. Investors answer to confidence. And confidence collapses quickly when evidence arrives without drama. I requested a meeting under the pretense of a project review, attaching a subject line so ordinary it practically yawned. The reply came within an hour. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. The room was smaller than Richard's office and louder in its silence. No glass walls, no decorative art, just a long table, 2 leather chairs, and a man whose expression didn't invite performance. I sat down and waited. "Emily," he said, flipping open a folder. "You wanted to discuss a concern." "Yes," I replied, calm, prepared, several. I didn't start with stories. I started with facts, dates, messages, screenshots, meeting transcripts, witnessed comments, repetition, escalation. I slid the folder across the table and let the weight of it speak before I did anything else. He didn't interrupt. That mattered. As he read, the room changed. The air grew denser, not with tension, but with recognition. This wasn't someone venting. This was someone documenting. "These messages," he said finally. "You didn't respond?" "No." And he continued, "Yes." Silence again. "Why bring this here?" Because that was the question. The moment where intentions are measured. "Because this isn't about discomfort," I said. "It's about risk. Legal, ethical, reputational. And because I didn't want this diluted before it was understood." That was the truth, unadorned. He nodded slowly, eyes returning to the documents. "Has HR seen this?" "Not yet." A pause. Thoughtful, not suspicious. "You understand what this implies," he said. "I do," I replied. "I also understand what it protects." He closed the folder. "Leave this with me." I stood, thanked him, and walked out without waiting for reassurance. I didn't need promises. I needed momentum. The shift was immediate, though subtle. Richard was called into meetings he didn't schedule. His calendar filled with blocks marked simply private. He stopped wandering the floor. His jokes disappeared. He began replying to emails curtly, transactionally. Fear doesn't announce itself loudly in powerful men. It tightens their movements. It sharpens their speech. It drains color from their confidence. A week later, an email circulated quietly. "Richard Coleman will be away for a few days." No explanation. Speculation buzzed through the office like low-voltage electricity. People noticed. People always notice when power stumbles. When he returned, he was subdued, quieter. His eyes no longer lingered. He avoided my desk entirely. Then came the real shift. Another email. Shorter this time. "Richard Coleman is no longer with the company. We thank him for his contributions and wish him the best." No farewell meeting, no goodbye speeches. His office was cleared before lunch. By the afternoon, his name vanished from shared documents, from distribution lists, from internal systems, as if he had never been there at all. That's how power ends sometimes, not with impact, but with erasure. I sat at my desk, hands folded, heart strangely still. No joy surged through me, no sense of triumph. Only a deep, settling quiet. People stopped by later. Subtle looks. Muted congratulations disguised as curiosity. "You okay?" someone asked. "I'm fine," I said. And I was. Because this hadn't been about revenge. It wasn't about winning. It was about choosing the right audience, people who understood cost and consequence, not comfort. Richard thought power lived in his voice, his office, his ability to humiliate. He never realized how quickly it disappears when the wrong eyes see the right facts. And I knew then, with certainty as calm as breath, that the storm had passed, not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. The hallway felt different afterward, lighter, honest. Power doesn't leave all at once. It drains. I noticed it first in the way Richard walked into the building on his last week. Shoulders stiff, steps measured, eyes scanning instead of commanding. The man who once occupied space without question now moved as if unsure how much of it he was still allowed to claim. He avoided people, kept his head down, responded to greetings with nods that felt rehearsed. The silence that once protected him now wrapped around him like exposure. He was called in for a conversation on a Tuesday morning. That phrase spread quickly, passed from desk to desk in lowered voices. No one said his name out loud, but no one needed to. We all understood what it meant when someone with that level of authority was summoned without context. The door closed behind him. An hour passed, then 2. When it finally opened, Richard walked out pale, lips pressed together, the practiced confidence erased. He didn't look at anyone, not even at me, especially not at me. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked small. No raised voice followed, no slammed door, no dramatic confrontation played out in the open. That's another myth about accountability, that it's loud, that it satisfies the audience. In reality, real consequences arrive quietly and leave people alone with themselves. The following days were strange. Richard still had his title, still had his office, but it was like watching a shadow perform a familiar routine. Meetings were canceled, reassigned, shortened. Decisions were deferred. People stopped asking him for approval. When power disappears, it takes language with it. No one has heard back from Richard. Let's wait on confirmation. We'll circle back once this is resolved. Resolved, a word that suggests inevitability. On Friday, I passed his office and saw him packing a box. No photos, no awards, just files and personal items stacked carefully, as if order might preserve dignity. His door was open, but the space already felt abandoned. By Monday, his name was gone. Company directories updated overnight. Shared drives reassigned ownership. His email auto-responded with a generic message directing inquiries elsewhere. It was as if the system itself had rejected him. 2 weeks later, his office was reassigned. Someone else sat at that desk, laughed softly during calls, placed a plant by the window. Life didn't pause to acknowledge the change. It never does. What surprised me most wasn't the speed. It was the absence of resistance. No counter-narrative, no defense, no whispered campaign against me. That told me everything I needed to know. Men like Richard are bold only when they're certain the structure will hold them. Once it cracks, they retreat inward, trying to salvage what remains instead of fighting for what they've lost. I felt no urge to celebrate. What I felt was release. A tension I hadn't fully registered let go of my shoulders, my jaw, my breath. The office felt different, not safer in some grand sense, but clearer. People spoke more freely, laughed without checking who might hear. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the same hallway where I'd once walked away from his office, heart pounding, pretending calm. This time, my steps were unmeasured, unburdened. Richard had lost his power long before he lost his job. He lost it the moment evidence met the right eyes, the moment authority stopped believing in him. Titles don't protect behavior. Belief does. And once belief is withdrawn, everything collapses quietly behind it. I understood then that accountability isn't dramatic. It's administrative, systemic, final. And standing there, watching the building absorb his absence without effort, I realized something else. I hadn't destroyed him. I had simply stopped holding him up. I didn't expect to see him again. That was part of the illusion I hadn't questioned. That once someone disappears from emails, calendars, and meeting rooms, they vanish from your life entirely. But reality isn't that tidy. Power evaporates faster than presence. I was leaving late, my bag heavier than usual with reports I planned to review at home. The hallway near the elevators was nearly empty, lit by that dull, end-of-day fluorescence that makes everything feel provisional, unfinished. I heard my name before I saw him. Emily. I stopped. For a moment, I considered pretending I hadn't heard. It would have been easy, plausible, safe. But some confrontations don't arrive as threats. They arrive as closures waiting to be acknowledged. I turned. Richard stood a few steps behind me, jacket unbuttoned, tie gone. His hair, once carefully maintained, had started to gray at the temples in a way I didn't remember noticing before. Without the posture, without the authority, he looked older, less defined, human. "You shouldn't be here," I said calmly. He let out a dry laugh. "Still giving orders?" "No," I replied, stating facts. That stung. I could see it in the way his mouth tightened. "I just wanted to talk," he said. 5 minutes. "We have nothing to talk about." He stepped closer anyway. "You ruined everything," he said. And there it was. Accusation stripped of confidence, naked and desperate. Years of work. One accusation, and it's gone. I studied him then, fully, without fear or adrenaline muddying my vision. This was the man who had once made entire rooms shrink. Now he stood in an empty corridor, voice low, edges fraying. "That's not what happened," I said quietly. He scoffed. "You went behind my back. I chose the right channel. You didn't even give me a chance to explain." I met his eyes. "You had many chances. You took none of them." Silence filled the space between us, heavy but not hostile. He was searching for something. Anger, regret, guilt. Anything that might restore the imbalance he was used to. "You know," he said finally, "people like you think you're changing things, but you're just collateral damage waiting to happen. You'll be labeled difficult, untouchable, not worth the trouble." I smiled faintly. "Funny," I said. "I heard the same warnings before. From you. That wasn't—" "This conversation is over," I interrupted, not harshly, just firmly. "And before you leave, understand this." He tensed. "You didn't fall because of me," I continued. "You fell because your behavior couldn't survive light. I didn't twist anything. I didn't exaggerate. I documented." His shoulders dropped then, just slightly. The fight leaked out of him. "I was just joking," he muttered. "That's how things work. You know that." "No," I said. "That's how they used to work." That landed harder than anything else. For a long second, neither of us spoke. The hallway hummed softly around us. Vents, distant footsteps, the ordinary sounds of a building that had already moved on. "You could have destroyed me completely," he said at last. I shook my head. "I didn't destroy you at all." "Then what do you call this?" "I call it accountability," I replied. "And I suggest you get used to it." I turned toward the elevators. "Emily." I paused, just for a moment, but I didn't turn back. "You think you won," he said. I finally looked over my shoulder. "This was never a competition," I said. "It was a correction." The elevator doors opened behind me with a soft chime. I stepped inside as they began to close. The last thing I saw was Richard standing alone in the hallway, smaller than I remembered, frozen in the aftermath of consequences he had never believed would arrive. As the doors shut, I felt no rush of triumph, only finality. That was the last time I saw him. And as the elevator descended, carrying me back into a life no longer shaped by his presence, I understood something with perfect clarity. Confrontation isn't always about winning the argument. Sometimes it's about walking away knowing there's nothing left to say. The promotion didn't arrive with drama. No apology attached, no mention of Richard, no whispered acknowledgement of what had transpired. It came the way real recognition usually does, quietly, officially, without spectacle. An email, a meeting request, a conversation framed around leadership, consistency, and trust. "You've shown remarkable composure under pressure," they said. "You've proven you understand systems, not just tasks. You've earned this." Earned. That word mattered, because nothing about what followed felt like revenge. Revenge burns hot and fast and leaves residue behind. This felt clean, stable, deserved. I moved into a new office 2 weeks later, smaller than Richard's had been, but brighter. The window faced east. Morning light filled the room without resistance. I placed my desk carefully, hung nothing on the walls except a whiteboard. Space mattered to me now. People treated me differently, not cautiously, not reverently, but honestly. Conversations sharpened, meetings ran tighter, interruptions decreased. Respect, it turns out, is contagious when it's modeled instead of demanded. Sometimes, in quiet moments between work and thought, memories surfaced. His voice, the laughter, the comment. Not with anger anymore, not even with discomfort. More like recalling a storm that once passed close enough to change your understanding of weather forever. I realized then that what stayed with me wasn't the harm. It was the lesson. Power doesn't announce itself only through authority. It reveals itself in tolerance, what people allow, excuse, or quietly absorb. For a long time, I'd thought survival meant adaptation, endurance, learning how to fit inside flawed structures. I was wrong. Real strength came from clarity, from knowing where lines existed and refusing to blur them, even when it would have been easier to look away, especially then. Sometimes, walking past conference rooms, I caught my reflection in the glass and barely recognized the woman staring back. Straighter posture, quieter confidence, not hardened, refined. One afternoon, a junior analyst knocked on my door. "Can I ask you something?" she said, hesitant. "Of course." She hesitated, then said, "How do you know when to speak up?" I didn't answer immediately. "You know," I said finally, "when staying silent would cost you more than being heard." She nodded slowly, as if committing that to memory. That was how change moved now, not through grand gestures, but through conversations that planted decisions before they were ever needed. I never heard from Richard again. No messages, no apologies, no attempts at redemption. His absence wasn't loud enough to echo, and over time, even his name stopped carrying weight. But every so often, when work grew demanding or pressure mounted, his words resurfaced uninvited. "If you start jumping on me, your career will really take off." The irony no longer stung, it instructed. Some people believe they can humiliate others without consequence. They confuse patience for weakness, silence for consent, confidence for complexity. They forget something essential. Patience can be a weapon. Clarity can dismantle power. And restraint doesn't mean surrender. I didn't rise because he fell. I rose because I refused to stay where I was diminished. And that, more than anything else, was the ending he never saw coming.